When I was a kid, I felt as if no matter the game that I was playing, I could get fully involved into it. Nothing else mattered when I was playing these games. I'd roam around the Unova location within Pokemon Black and White and just love my time in this title. I wouldn't be thinking about anything else outside of Pokemon and what I was doing in that moment. When I got into games like Skyrim, I found myself enthralled by the world, the stories, and could lose myself for hours on end in the world of Tamriel, just enjoying every moment. As I've gotten older, I found it really hard for any game to fully immerse me or keep me dialed in what's happening in that gaming world and distract me from reality. That is the feeling that we are after more than anything. The main focus of entertainment is to immerse us and take us out of our own lives for at least a couple of hours. The only game that has been able to do this for me in the last 5 years was Red Dead Redemption 2, as I was so amazed by the stories being told and just wanted to continue seeing where it would lead. I want to try and understand with you today why this feeling is one I struggle with, as I feel as if this is something that you might find value in if you're someone who's dealing with this same issue. The first place that I want to start is by talking about the games that I would become immersed within entirely, and what they have in common with one another, and also what they don't necessarily have in common with one another. But primarily, what was it that was able to keep my focus for such a long period of time? So let's talk about struggling to get immersed as I age. I have a few games within my childhood that could completely immerse me greatly, such as the Pokemon games, Skyrim, Dishonored, and a few more. However, I wanted to take a moment to talk about two things about this subject. The first is that I know that there are some games that have come out, like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Jedi Survivor, that have done a good job in keeping me entertained, immersed, and giving me the ability to disconnect, but for different reasons. And the other is that I'm going to talk about a couple other games that have been able to immerse me greatly, however, not for the reasons that I would like. Either being a genre that does nothing more than drain time without any genuine reward to have gained from the experience, or the other issue, which is becoming so wrapped up in it, becoming so immersed, that we start to walk into the realm of addiction more than we're actually being immersed within the game itself and enjoying the experience for good reasons. Skyrim was the first game that I was able to walk away with an understanding of what being immersed within a game and the world itself would look like. I've experienced what it's like to be immersed in moments of Pokemon releases and Animal Crossing City Folk as a child, but this game was the first that made me realise more about the premise itself of immersion, even if I wasn't labelling it as such. At this point, it was the first game that I was able to roleplay within. It was a game that was able to allow my creativity to shine through with stories that I was able to create myself, even if I wasn't playing necessarily the world itself at the beginning for the sake of playing Skyrim. I was creating my own stories, my own vision of what I wanted the world to be, because I had stories in my own head that I wanted to talk about. Sadly, this sort of creativity was taken out of me as I got older throughout the schooling system. Skyrim was able to immerse me for 3 reasons in particular. The first is that it allows you to feel as if you're a part of that era in history through a fantastical lens. It was a game that made me visualize stories that I had been imagining in my own mind for years, and it allowed me to be influenced by what the world of Skyrim looks like in my imagination today. The second reason is that this game has a light-hearted feeling. This might sound odd, but it's for the same reason that I love certain pieces of fiction and certain pieces of cinema that I'm not going to actually mention today because I don't want to start a war of some kind in the comment sections. But yeah, there are some that are beloved that honestly I prefer different versions of it. I enjoy dark, gritty stories, but the ones I find myself coming back to in moments of comfort and intrigue are the ones that are light-hearted worlds, even with cruel stories. What I mean by light-hearted is twofold. One is this idea of being light, and the other is more subjective with the idea of being light-hearted. The environment of this game, in a way, makes it so that the world itself is a character of its own. The second is that the game is able to tell stories that are serious and do have dark themes to them, but they're still enjoyable and don't feel as if you're just having to be miserable throughout the entire experience, and you have to just do some action scenes to keep up the pace of the game. The last area that really helps with immersion is that it's able to build the world through the main manner of storytelling, whether that is listening in on conversations being told that you don't have to force your way into when you're in different areas, books that you can pick up and read, moments within quests where you're just experiencing the world itself for yourself, and you get to experience the real power of a Daedra prince right in front of you. All of the methods of world building through stories, characters, and the cities new and old all add to this feeling of building an immersive world to explore. Then we have Red Dead Redemption 2, which was massively surprising for me. At first, it was a game that I didn't think was going to be that immersive or enjoyable for me personally, as I originally did have to push myself through the first bit of this game, as I found the time setting itself and the overall premise of the game originally a very boring one. I also knew that I could make a video out of it if I did end up enjoying it, and in a way, forcing myself through the game and having that mentality at the beginning was allowing me to take on the game and enjoy the game way more later on. I'm glad that I pushed myself through the first hours of this game, because even though for some it may be easy, it may be enjoyable, but for me as someone who doesn't enjoy that sort of setting, the cowboy aesthetic, it was something that I had to do to then truly enjoy the title that is Red Dead Redemption 2. The reason that pushing myself through the game worked for me, or at least my belief as to why, is something that's linked to psychology. I don't exactly remember where I heard this, but this idea of that when you've heard someone talk for 6 hours, you end up trusting them far more than you might have done otherwise. This kind of links to this idea of forcing myself through the game. It was as if my mind had just unlocked something, which honestly has to be the story just clicking with my mind. The reason I'm using this comparison is that I think to a degree, the more time we put into something, even if at first we don't like it, we start to grow an enjoyment towards it, or at least a tolerance for it. However, when I play the game now, especially after truly loving the game after my first playthrough, and after around 10 hours of playing the original game, it made me want to just wander around the world itself. More so in the second playthrough, as I found more joy from just exploring, riding around, fishing, and hunting. All of these things are slow, and due to the way that the game presents itself and looks, it makes you feel as if you're experiencing it for yourself through another person's eye. Due to the amount of effort that was put into making the game world, from the stunning vistas, wonderful characters, realistic old towns, and much more, it builds a sense of a world feeling like it actually exists, and that you can be immersed in it as it's starting to connect far more and closer to the reality that we have become accustomed to. This is what truly makes us immersed to this world, is that feeling that the world is something not too far from our own. Even in the way that characters present themselves, it's not entirely good or evil. These things are very similar to the personal experiences that we have, as most people aren't just completely evil or completely good. This is something that only a game like Red Dead 2 or a game created by Rockstar can truly pull off, giving us a world not too far from our own, but through an experience that is enjoyable, one with many characters with complex histories, complex stories, complex ways of being, and just telling it through a slightly different filter of what we might get within the world of cinema or within our own real world. The last title that was able to grip me and immerse me entirely into its world was Jedi Survivor. I don't necessarily believe though it's due to the fact that the world and the characters are something that this game excels within. However, I do think that it does a good job in both. This game was heavily in favour for many due to the pre-existing lore and stories that are the Star Wars universe. It was a game that was able to truly bring me in because I love Star Wars and I also loved the previous title. So when I was playing it, I found it enjoyable for the most part because it was connecting me with something that I'd already truly been a fan of prior and loved deeply. This side of immersion is something that I'm going to label as an assisted world, something that at times can be on its own and work incredibly well and function perfectly. However, at times it also needs that assistance from the pre-existing love that people have for the world that it exists within. We then have multiplayer games, and I'm not going to focus on any in particular, but the three main ones for me were always Call of Duty, Siege, and CS. All three of these games are ones that I've been heavily invested to in the past, or even can be to this day. The main reason though is that they act as a way to disconnect you from reality for the most part in a very cheap and easy way. This is where you start to walk into the territories of something being more like a crutch or purely a distraction from reality for more of a coping reason. We choose to play these games because they immerse us immensely, and they do it very easily. They fully take all of our attention away from the real world for a matter of minutes at a time, and it's able to then take you back out the moment you die. It's one of those things that walks into that territory of questionable methods to immerse you within their titles, but it does work and people seem to be happy with it. These sorts of games are the ones that I don't really feel like are earned immersion, if that makes sense. I don't believe that this gives you that feeling of immersion because they've built something that's truly groundbreaking, a world that you want to walk around in. It's solely because you have to be glued to your screen and fully focused to avoid dying. The last area to cover within immersion is going to be addiction. This was a game like GTA Roleplay for me and Destiny. Both games I was heavily into the territories of addiction. This is immersion to an extent, as I was fully immersed within what I was playing, whether it was doing a raid in Destiny or fully in character within GTA RP, and I was into those worlds that I was playing, but it was also affecting me negatively in life in the real world. This form of immersion is something that is dangerous and is the dark side of immersion, which is using games that have a great ability to immerse us and take us out of real life to enjoy the world of escapism in a way that is closer to the use and abuse situation that you get within the likes of drugs and alcohol. It means that instead of actually enjoying the experience and actually having something that immerses us because it's truly wonderful, it starts to walk into those territories of kind of blending what I mentioned earlier with something like a multiplayer title with a world that is captivating. All 5 of those are forms and ways that games can immerse us and cause different consequences given the circumstances. For me, the main areas that make games immersive are being in pre-existing worlds that I love, like Jedi Survivor, being set in a world that is lighthearted, lore deep, and connects you with a time in history that I love. It's able to make a world come to life because it's closer to our own in many ways. However, we also have the negative side, the side that makes gaming worlds so similar to real life that it becomes closer to actual life, that you're actually living and spending more time within than your own waking day. The last set of games are the ones that dial you in for just a couple of moments. They make your heart rate rise and enter into a leaned over posture so that you can dominate whatever lobby you're within. These 5 forms have pros and cons to them, and they don't always work for some reason. There are many games though out there that I have enjoyed in the past and I still struggle with getting immersed within them. They are games that I enjoy wandering around playing, however the immersion just isn't clicking. They're stuff that I want to love, but it's just not clicking for me. The worlds are just not immersing me. So let's talk about some of those releases. The first game is one that I desperately want to love, but I just can't, which is Breath of the Wild. I honestly can't explain to you what it is about the game that puts me off. The only thing that comes to mind is that whenever I've tried to play this game, is that it just isn't engaging me, and nothing in the world sticks out to me as something that I want to be doing. I can recognise the parts that people love about this game, which is the lack of hand-holding and just exploring around, but if I'm honest, it wasn't kicking me in the same way to explore around as the likes of Elden Ring was, as that game for me is one of the first and only games to truly make me just want to explore around a game's world. I like having some sense of direction as well in games, even if it's just a little bit. I'd rather have a little bit of direction to where to go and what to do, instead of just having absolutely nothing and kind of being left to your own devices. It's a game that I truly do want to enjoy, as I've heard so many good things about it, and I'm thinking of taking the same approach that I did to Red Dead Redemption 2, and just pushing myself into the game and going through that first few hours and just forcing my way through. Maybe I might on some random weekend at some point, just trying to get into it, because I do really want to enjoy this game. Another one that I wish I could get into, but I just can't, is Hollow Knight. The only reason I can say for this issue, if I'm honest, is just that 2D games just aren't something that I mess around with too much. I want to enjoy it, but I just don't find it interesting. Whenever I've tried playing the game, my brain can't zone out at all from the factor that I am playing this platformer experience. Peak immersion for me is that I know that I am obviously playing a game, but it's so far at the back of my mind, and you're just so encompassed by everything that you're doing and exploring that it gets rid of that thought entirely, or at least pushes it back to the extent where you just zone out and don't even realize that you are playing a game. You're just enjoying the experience. You enter into, I guess, a form of flow state, I guess is another word for immersion within games. I do think it's because the gameplay has got a massive learning curve at that beginning, and for me, any form of game that has a big learning curve at the beginning always strips me out of being immersed immediately. I always struggle with it just because it is the case of a, skill issue, but like it is the case that I want to enjoy these games. So again, it's going to be pushing myself in the future to try and get into it. However, I don't want to just force myself for the sake of, forcing my way through it. I do want to, from time to time, be able to play a game, pick it up, and just find it interesting from the get-go, instead of feeling as if I need to pressure myself to play them. Now the one that's going to get me into a lot of trouble with the gaming space online because they love this game, which is Elden Ring, as I honestly struggle to truly get immersed in it. I did find the world exploration amazing. I genuinely can't say that there has been another game that has made me genuinely think, wow, let me go run over here because I want to see what's over there. This is one of the only games that has done that for me. However, again, like I just mentioned, there is a steep learning curve to these sorts of games, and it makes it incredibly hard for me to disconnect. At times you could argue that you do become fully engaged in the moment. It kind of does the same sort of tricks that something like a multiplayer game would do, where you have to keep yourself alive, you have to be on your toes all the time. However, due to this, and due to the fact that there is such a learning curve and you die so often over just small hiccups that can happen, it means that you have to be so focused on what you're doing with your hands to make sure that you aren't screwing up when you are trying to dodge an attack or parry perfectly. This is something more closer to the idea of simply the types of games that I love, which Elden Ring isn't. However, I do see the appeal. Again, I am interested, I would love to be into these games. I recently decided to pick up Sekiro as I want to check it out. The long arms are very odd, okay? I don't know what the design of those arms are. I'm hoping that there's some utility to them later on in the game or something. But yeah, I want to try out these games. I want to enjoy them, as I would like to partake in this feeling of great titles that you can play and pick up. However, again, immersion is something that I'm looking for, and I struggle to get immersed in games that do have big learning curves, because that isn't the experience that I'm aiming to get out of a game. I'm not aiming to get frustrated constantly, which these sorts of games definitely do. And then the last game that I'm going to be talking about isn't necessarily a game, but a franchise as a whole, which is the Fallout games. I've always struggled with these titles, and there is actually a very big reason for this, which is incredibly odd considering most people would probably expect me to absolutely love them, as I do enjoy Skyrim, for example, and I do like Oblivion. However, I do think that these games run into a slight issue, which is the genre of the game itself for me personally. I don't find post-apocalyptic worlds and settings to be that interesting. For the most part, I've always found them very boring. I was someone that actually did end up enjoying something like The Walking Dead from seasons 1 to 6, however after that I started to find the show was becoming way too slow, but again, I was enjoying it more for the story itself and the story being told than the world it was set within. I really enjoyed the Fallout TV show as well. Again, it's able to captivate me because of the story being told and what it's doing with the gaming lore. However, the game's settings, I always struggle to heavily care about. I don't know if it's just the fact that I don't enjoy the genre itself, or if there is other external factors as well that do play a part into the Fallout games in particular, but for me, generally speaking, most games that are set in post-apocalyptic worlds, if they don't have really just good stories being told, I find the worlds themselves incredibly bland, boring, and just not interesting to look at. It's just normally a load of destroyed buildings plus emptiness. That's typically what it is. The only redeeming factor for something like The Walking Dead or the Fallout TV show is, again, I liked the stories being told. It's the same issue that I had within RDR2. Originally, I didn't care about the setting, I don't care about history around cowboys, I don't care about any of that. However, the story being told was so gripping that it made me care about all of those things. Sadly, with all of the Fallout games, I've never found an actual narrative for any of them to be overly appealing or gripping for me, to truly skip over those issues that I mentioned with the world itself and the setting itself of that world. The setting that all of this leads me towards is, well, is it just me? Well, I do think it is, as I know that the games that I struggle getting immersed within myself are ones that many others enjoy as well. So the question does have to be asked, is it just me? Well, like I said, I do think so. However, I do believe that this is connected to the topic of today's video, which is age. Now, half of this issue is going to be down to personal tastes in games. For example, I love the worlds that I mentioned earlier, such as Skyrim and Assassin's Creed titles, due to the ability of being able to give me a fantastical world and a blend of kind of either history through the extreme fantastical lens, like Skyrim. Obviously, there's no actual history going on. It can give you that feeling of the medieval fantasy, and then with Assassin's Creed, you do get blends of history. You do get moments of time that you can go to and explore. Both of them are really interesting to me. Again, I love both of them because they're able to cultivate something that over the years has built to the world of fiction that I just absolutely adore. With that though, you're going to walk into some areas where you don't like certain titles because your taste just isn't there for those experiences. For me, a game like Elden Ring sounds like something that on paper I should absolutely love when it comes to this setting of being a dark fantasy world. However, where it loses me is that learning curve. I'm not someone personally who's got a massive amount of patience, especially when it comes to something like a game. Something in my mind that typically is going to either be telling me an outstanding story or is going to be able to take me from reality for just a moment. And due to that learning curve, it does mean that it doesn't really help me with either one of those. And again, this is where the thing that a game does for you is going to be incredibly subjective and incredibly just your own personal experience. Something like Red Dead Redemption 2, which I played very recently in the grand scheme of my life, was something that was able to fully immerse me in a world that, on paper, I wouldn't be interested in at all. That has more to do with what I mentioned earlier. The gripping and emotional story and the characters that are being attached to that story is able to make me actually interested in those prior things that I wasn't interested in at all. What also helps Red Dead Redemption 2 is that the game isn't outstandingly hard by any means, and it's very easy to get into, especially if you've played any of their former titles. It means that you're able to get locked into a world even more and even more easily. Something as small as not having a good looking auto riding mechanic for your horses is something that makes something like Red Dead Redemption 2 far more immersive than an RPG Assassin's Creed game, because you're able to actually immerse yourself whilst you're riding around, because you have to be paying attention to what you're doing, whereas in Assassin's Creed you can very literally just set the marker and you will be riding for like 10 to 15 minutes and you will just end up scrolling TikTok or something. But even with all of that and the idea of acquired taste, the one thing that I've really realised is that no game besides a very few handful of games have truly been able to immerse me. And I do believe that that has something to do with age, not necessarily because when we age we struggle to get immersed out of our own reality solely because of us getting older, but I do believe it has something more to do with the factor of what our lives look like as we get older. This could be something that changes as I get older personally and I learn how to balance things way better. However, for now, the experience that I've been having has been far more in the direction of just struggling to get lost in a gaming world than being able to easily get captivated by one. It's an experience that I've noticed with many as well, including my own viewers, so let's talk about how age is playing some form of factor here. As I've gotten older, I found myself struggling to shut off my mind from the day-to-day life. Whether that's needing to get something really small complete, or just wanting to achieve something like building myself a workout routine that I'll actually stick to, or habits that I had meant to do instead. This is a feeling that is linked to that previous video I made about feeling guilty while gaming, so make sure to check that out if you are interested. I've really been trying, however, to understand why in particular I'm struggling to immerse myself, and the only place that I can put my finger on it is age and taste. Age will make us think about our own progression, whether that's starting a family, if we can get to that next promotion, or if we have time for the plans that we've committed to. Those are all things that will make life become a main focus, and that is a good thing. However, it's not helping us deal with this feeling of struggle when it comes to getting ourselves immersed into something, because again, not everything that you do in your day-to-day life needs to be 100% productive. What I need to say though is this clearly isn't an issue with everyone. Some find it really easy to just load up a game and get involved into it, and I believe this issue comes more for the people who do strive for more in their lives, and having had games as much more of a crutch in your life than something that you truly enjoy, especially when it's being masked in that way, where you feel as if something that you're playing is something that you truly enjoy when in reality you never crack a smile. For me to understand how we could become more immersed in this, I want to go through those other games that I mentioned, the ones that immersed me, and asking that question of, is it just a feeling that only a few games can give? A part of me does believe that only a few games can give you this feeling throughout your entire life, either due to only a few games having all those pieces of the puzzle put together to create an immersive world, or because that they are linked to times in your life that you chose to play them. For example, if I forced myself to continue Red Dead Redemption 2 when I first tried it after getting out of hospital in 2020, then I probably wouldn't have enjoyed the experience very much because of my own physical health at the time. However, when I got around to actually giving the game a shot in 2022, I was in my prime time to be giving myself a proper shot at this game. I was ready emotionally to partake on this journey that I was about to experience. However, it was also a prime time for me to play. Again, a lot of prime times, purely because I had a week off work and I didn't feel any guilt at the time, because obviously I was working my job, I had a week off, and I decided to sit there and play this game, which then led to me enjoying the game deeply. However, there is other games that you might be playing throughout your entire life that you went to in moments where you feel the need to go back to them. For me, those two games are Skyrim and Assassin's Creed 2. Both of those two were games that I would play for hours on end, especially when I was growing up, and would turn on if my parents were arguing or if something drastic was happening in my life. They acted as a comfort game. They were worlds that I could get lost into due to these ideas I mentioned earlier, but also because my mind had started to create this idea of what these titles were doing for me. In my mind, these games are the games that I know that if I want to disconnect myself and guarantee that to happen, they're there. They act in a way similar to something like alcohol or a form of drug that in any moment I could start playing and my brain will easily disconnect from reality and just get immersed by the game that I'm playing. And this is all due to the fact that growing up, my brain has kind of correlated these experiences with finding peace and, just having a safe space to go to in those moments. Similar to how if you're someone who works in the same space as you sleep, you'll find it really easy to just have the desire to crawl back in bed, or the reverse, you'll be up all night trying to think about work. Once you disconnect those two things, your mind can sit and rest in the room designated to resting, and work in the one for working. This is how I believe my mind has adopted games like Assassin's Creed II and Skyrim into the mind of my comfort zone. The spot that allows it to just shut off entirely, and in a way becomes incredibly immersive, but not because the games themselves are doing anything in particular, but because of the experiences that they have done for me in the past and therefore mean to me now. The most recent game was Jedi Survivor, as it was the first in a long time of anything coming out of the Star Wars franchise that I was able to enjoy. I was able to connect with those feelings that I had when growing up watching some of the movies, and also watching the Clone Wars TV show. This game was able to connect me to those feelings heavily that I had within childhood, which is where I do believe both this, Skyrim, and Assassin's Creed 2 all have in common. They're able to connect my current state of mind to my younger self, the one who was able to become fully immersed easily. A part of me does genuinely believe that immersion in games can only be found in some games throughout your life. However, that doesn't mean that games can't have aspects catered to immersing us, as well as, us being good at getting into the game worlds themselves. A game that I haven't mentioned yet that does an amazing job of immersing people into the world and characters that you're playing is Arkham Knight. I believe that this game is the pinnacle of a small game that has big green ticks in the immersion boxes. From the look and feel of the world through to the gliding around as Batman and the beatdowns that you're able to perform like you are Batman in Gotham in the world that they have created. For games to be immersive, for me, they have to have a few things that they can do really well, which is world building, even if it's in a small game, limited technical issues, and fundamentally trying to keep the world consistent to what the player knows. This means that if you're going to spend 7 entries in a franchise creating lore about it and having a load of different things, don't just randomly decide to add mythical creatures in there. There are 2 things that we can do when it comes to getting immersed into a game, the first of which is kind of more happenstance more than anything, which is playing a game in a moment of need. If you need to disconnect from reality for a bit, instead of picking up the same old game, try something new. This means for me, instead of playing something like Skyrim, I'm going to try out a game like Outer Wilds. It means that you can go and check out a game just for a little bit to see if it's something that you're a bit more interested in. Instead of pushing yourself to sit there for hours on end, which could end up leading to dread of the idea of even touching the game in the first place and not liking it, just try it out for 10 minutes. See if you enjoy the basic experience that the game has to offer. The second thing that I believe that we have far more control over is having a life. Actually go out and do something with your life. I believe for me anyways, this is an issue that's heavily connected to that feeling of guilt while playing games. So instead of just playing a game hoping to enjoy it and hoping that I can get immersed, I'll actually have a life. Go for a walk, see my friends, do a trip, build myself up physically. And while you're on that path, you can stop feeling guilty while you're gaming and become immersed knowing you've done what you needed to do and what you wanted to do prior to sitting down and playing the game. That might mean playing less games than you do right now. I would rather play very few games every year, or even 1 game a year that I truly enjoyed, than 100 different games that I try out and then just end up never touching again because I wasn't in the right state of mind to play them in the first place. I hope today's video has been helpful in some way. I wanted to make more videos around this feeling of games and that feeling that they can give you instead of focusing on all the technicalities all the time. So if this is something that interests you, then please make sure to hit the subscribe button. If you want early access to content like this and get some extra goodies, then make sure to check out the Patreon as well, or you can leave a super chat if you want to support directly. With that all being said though, please make sure to come join the Discord, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in the next video. So I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.